The amazing drama you're about to see is a matter of human record. You may believe it or not. But the real people who live this story, they believe it. They know. They took that one step beyond.
Most people know the classic anthology series The Twilight Zone. But almost a year before The Twilight Zone debuted, there was another spooky anthology series thrilling viewers, One Step Beyond. John Newland, Larry Marcus, Merwin Gerard, and Collier Young were looking to develop a new series that would break new ground in television. Merwin Gerard had an idea for an anthology series called Fantasy, where one week it would be a fantasy story, the next horror, the third week it would be a paranormal story, then the fourth week it would be science fiction. But since horror, fantasy, and science fiction had already been done on television, and aside from ESP, which only lasted a month, no TV series had ever been exclusively about the paranormal, the four men decided to go strictly with paranormal stories. And they decided that every episode would be based on real paranormal evidence, either anecdotal or published. John Newland, who was an established TV star, would serve as host and would direct every episode. The group raised $30,000 to film a pilot, and Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, liked it and agreed to sponsor a full season, which is why the series was originally called Alcoa Presents One Step Beyond. The Alcoa Presents was dropped when it went into syndication. ABC agreed to air the series, and for all 3 seasons, it aired on Tuesday nights at the spooky time of 10 p.m. They did 96 half-hour episodes, and here are the top 10 best ones.
Come, you're witnessing strange, unexpected, mysterious, but not to be denied. Join me now and take one step beyond.
Number 10. The Dark Room. The photojournalist Rita Wallace has rented an apartment in France. She asked her landlady if she could recommend some interesting faces. Then a strange man shows up at the apartment. Rita assumes he's a model, but it's the ghost of the old tenant, Jean Gabot, who murdered his wife.
This was their first ghost story, and the show's emphasis on realism and staying true to real paranormal evidence is what makes it so spooky.
The house doesn't look like a movie haunted house, but it has character. It's old and has history, which makes it a place where a ghost would be more likely to be.
According to Cecilia Green and Charles McCreary, ghosts are seen as solid figures, just like me. In fact, you may not be aware that what you're seeing is actually a ghost. And that's how they do Jean Gabot.
He'll appear and disappear in the room, but they don't do it with special effects. Instead, they'll show Rita suffering from a migraine. Then they show him in the room. So theoretically, he could have come in while she was distracted. The actor Marcel Dalio plays it with a quiet, passive quality. And because the emphasis is on being real and not on being scary, when it finally does turn scary, it is frightening.
While she's taking pictures, her instructions make Jean Gabot remember murdering his wife.
Now think back to something that made you unhappy. Something you did, perhaps, that you regret.
Where have you been, Cecile?
Who's Cecile?
You filthy, cheap scam!
I'm not Cecile!
Are you going to meet him, Cecile? Is it the same one or a new one? I want to know what happened, Cecile!
It's a simple ghost story, but that's what makes it so effective. It feels like it could happen to anyone.
Number 9. Tidal Wave. A tsunami is about to strike Honolulu. Margaret North, who's in a wheelchair, calls for help, but no one can hear her because of the sirens. She tries to get out of her wheelchair, but falls. With no hope, she quietly cries, "Please help me." Commander Thomas Powers is driving to the beach, and is so hard of hearing that he can't hear the sirens. But miraculously, he hears Margaret, and they both escape the tsunami. This is such an exciting episode because the whole time you're on edge wondering, how is she going to get out? And then when Commander Thomas hears her, it really is a miracle. Now, I'm a sentimental person, and when I watched this episode, it gave me the same good feeling that I get when I watch It's a Wonderful Life. Then what really puts it over the edge for me is this episode was based on true events, and at the end, John Newland interviews the real Margaret North.
Mrs. North, have you had any other psychic experiences? I think I may say that I have had other experiences, but nothing quite as dynamic as this that saved 2 lives. Isn't that marvelous? Mrs. North, you're a believer, aren't you? Yes, I am a believer. I believe we are surrounded by, perhaps unconsciously, influences that oft times determine our destiny. I must say that I do too.
This would have been a groovy addition to any of the more factual episodes. But with this one, it really makes you feel like miracles are possible. Number 8. Night of the Kill. Little Davy has been lost in the woods for 3 days. Once he's found, he tells his parents that he was protected by a huge creature. When the locals see it, they try to hunt it down. I went to Colorado last August, and Bigfoot is a cultural icon. There are Bigfoot souvenirs. There's a Bigfoot museum. They have a celebration called Bigfoot Days. And I asked one of my friends who lives there if she believed in Bigfoot. And she said yes, and backed it up with the argument because of how vast the forests are, which is a valid point. And while this episode does not identify him by name, you could tell it's Bigfoot. Now the show says he's 16 feet tall, whereas most Bigfoot sightings put him at around 8. So I guess the camera really does add 10 pounds. But the evidence he leaves behind, big footprints and a terrible smell, is consistent with real Bigfoot sightings.
How in the world did he get up there? John, do you smell anything peculiar? Yeah, like an animal. Not like any animal I've ever smelled. Musty. Yesterday when we were looking in Bronze Canyon, Anne smelled the same thing. How did he get up there, Doc?
Similar to the Boris Karloff version of Frankenstein, Bigfoot is more of a misunderstood creature than a monster. Now the characters talk about seeing him, but they never show us Bigfoot. And at the end, when the villagers have burned down the woods, they never find the body, which I love, because it keeps Bigfoot as a mysterious figure who could always be out there, which is part of the appeal of the Bigfoot legend. Have you ever been certain your telephone would ring in the next 10 seconds? Or have you ever walked down a strange street and had the feeling that you knew what lay beyond the unturned corner? Yes? Then you've had a brief encounter with the world of the unknown. You are ready for the actual human experience that follows. Number 7. The Sacred Mushroom. This episode is done in a documentary style instead of being a drama. John Newland and a group of experts go to a remote village in Mexico to learn about the sacred mushroom, which is said to increase your ability for extrasensory perception. Later they return to the U.S., where John Newland himself eats the sacred mushroom. As you might imagine, this was the most popular episode of the series, and it was daring, because it is a scientific study of mushrooms with hallucinogenic properties. John Newland has his team of experts, including a neuropharmacologist and a professor of philosophy, and they meet with a spiritual leader called the Brujo, and they perform the ritual where they eat the sacred mushrooms, and the Brujo correctly identifies personal information about the group. This was a little too daring for Alcoa and for ABC, and they refused to air it because it was so weird. But since the One Step Beyond creative team had already put so much money in the episode, they came up with an idea to make it more familiar. John Newland himself should eat the sacred mushroom. So they set up 3 cameras in a lab, and they filmed John Newland taking a mushroom trip. He reports what he feels, what he sees, and they test his ESP abilities before and after eating the sacred mushroom. Now we'll do some testing before the effects of the mushrooms take hold.
Like what? Like what effects?
You'll find out. It's been about 20 minutes. How do you feel?
I feel strong. A kind of sense of well-being.
Now what do you see?
I see many colors. They're magnificent. I've never been so aware of color. It feels like power, speed, noise. I don't know how to translate that into a picture. It feels like one face is looking this way, and another face is looking that way.
That's pretty good. Your card scores were 12 hits out of 50, which is significant for ESP. What he doesn't say in the episode is he had flashbacks and hallucinatory moments for the next month. Along with this episode's groovy subject matter, because he's in it more, this episode really shows off what a wonderful host John Newland was. He's dignified, intelligent, likable, and, most importantly for One Step Beyond, where the stories are supposed to be based on fact, trustworthy. He never had a paranormal experience, but he always wanted to, and he believed in the paranormal, and it shines through. He reminds me of a young, adventurous college professor, and I guarantee you, Alfred Hitchcock would not have been willing to eat the sacred mushroom. Number 6. The Clown. Tom is abusive to his innocent young wife, Nani. Nani meets an equally innocent mute clown, and they become instant friends. But when Tom finds Nani inside of Pippo's trailer, he kills her with Pippo's scissors and runs away. But in windows and mirrors, he keeps seeing a vision of Pippo about to strangle him. Scary clowns have gotten more and more popular in recent years, and while this is hardly the first, this is an early and eerie example of a scary clown story. In the opening, John Newland hits it on the head on why clowns are scary. It's the mystery of what are they like underneath the makeup. What are they like when the show is over and they're no longer trying to make us laugh? Now, we only see Pippo as a clown. We don't see him without makeup. He's mute, so we don't hear his voice. And all we see him doing are silly clown antics. He's purely 100% focused on making us laugh. Then Tom kills Nani, and Pippo hates Tom. And that pure 100% focus is now on killing Tom. Because he can't talk, I feel like Pippo is a savant, and that's how he's able to do astral projection. And the images of him about to strangle Tom are so creepy. He doesn't look like a monster movie clown. But his makeup isn't up to Bozo standards either. It's a cheap circus clown makeup. And the black and white, the lighting, and his expression is what makes it sinister. Pippo strangles Tom in the lake. But then we go back to his trailer, and we find that Pippo has been there the whole time. But his clothes are soaking wet. It's not a twist ending the way the Twilight Zone would do it. Instead, it's more of a confirmation that this was paranormal, which in its own way is very spooky. Is the story you're about to see true? Well, no one really knows. No one as of yet has been able to prove or disprove it, and so it remains in limbo, a part of that vast, uncharted world of psychic phenomena, beyond our powers of explanation. Number 5. The Death Waltz. In the 1860s, American soldiers were at war with the Apaches. Lieutenant Fairchild has just returned home to Lily, and is planning to announce their engagement before the first waltz at the ball. But Lily wants to go with Lieutenant Buchanan, so she tricks her father into sending Fairchild on a dangerous mission, where he's killed. His ghost appears at the ball, dances the waltz with Lily, and Lily dies. This is such an eerie episode. It's based on the New Mexico legend of the Death Waltz, which can be found in the 1896 book Myths and Legends of Our Land by Charles M. Skinner. The only big difference is the climax takes place at the woman's wedding and not a ball. As the episode progresses, Lily hears the voice of Fairchild, but doesn't know it's a ghost, so the suspense and the atmosphere build. And then at the ball, while she's dancing the waltz, boogie woogie woogie, the ghost of Fairchild walks in. The music stops, and everyone looks shocked.
Lily, I'd come back from hell to be with you. Lily, this is our waltz.
Lily dies during their waltz, and with the music and the way it's filmed with the camera up above, it is such a haunting scene. One Step Beyond had some amazing guest stars. Now, I grew up loving Elizabeth Montgomery as the beautiful witch Samantha Stevens on Bewitched. And she's such a likable actress that instead of hating this character, I just love watching her be manipulative and wicked. And as always, she puts extra magic into the episode. Number 4. If You See Sally. Sally's younger brother accidentally drowns. Her father blames her for not watching him, so Sally leaves home. Her father realizes he was wrong and asks her to come back. Sally gets a ride with a stranger, but in the storm they have a car accident and Sally dies. Now every year when a driver stops, Sally's spirit gets in the car and tries to make it home.
If You See Sally is known as a vanishing hitchhiker story, where you pick up a hitchhiker, usually a beautiful woman, and after a while, she disappears. Even before cars, people will tell stories about hitchhikers disappearing from carriages and buggies. And all over the world, there are variations of the vanishing hitchhiker story.
In California, there is the Niles Canyon ghost. In Dallas, there is the Lady of White Rock Lake. But in the Chicago area, where I'm from, we have Resurrection Mary. When she was coming home from a dance, she got killed in a car accident. Now her ghost can be found hitchhiking on Archer Avenue. If you pick her up, she'll ask you to bring her home, but she'll always disappear when you reach Resurrection Cemetery. So this is a ghost story that has a universal and timeless appeal. In fact, when this episode aired, they got 45 fan mail letters from people saying that they had a similar experience.
Mister, I don't mean to scare you, but there's a girl in my car. I picked her up along the road. Now, I don't mean to scare you, but she's hurt very bad. Very bad.
You better come inside and have a cup of coffee.
How many times do I have to tell you there's a girl in my car dying?
She was in my car. I saw her. She was in my car. I picked her up along the road. I held her in my arms. I would have been killed if I hadn't stopped for her. She was in my car.
What makes it so spooky is you're not going out of your way to go to a haunted house. You're meeting a ghost by chance, and you don't even realize it's a ghost. Now, along with needing to be scary, a good ghost story also needs an element of tragedy. And this story has it. You understand why even after death, she's trying to make it home. You understand why she's a ghost.
Number 3. The Burning Girl. Alice Deering is a shy teenage girl living with her father and puritanical Aunt Mildred. Alice has the ability of cryokinesis, and when she's bullied or threatened, she unconsciously uses her mind to create a fire. But her father doesn't know she's doing it with her mind, and believes it's on purpose. The Burning Girl is like an early version of the classic Stephen King story Carrie. And what makes Carrie such a bloody good story is also what makes The Burning Girl so flame-tastic. It's an awkward, shy teenager who in terms of maturity is behind. She's bullied and not accepted at home or by her peers. But she has a special power that allows her to defend herself. Anyone who's ever felt like the odd one out can relate to Alice and to Carrie. And the cryokinesis or telekinesis is like the revenge you always wanted to have. What makes cryokinesis such a hot idea for a One Step Beyond episode is fire is dangerous, so it makes for an exciting story. But it also makes you think, because you wonder, how much power does the mind really have? The final thing I love about this one is the climax. Now, this one boy tried to rape Alice. So as a defense, with her mind, she set fire to his shack. Now, a policeman, her father, and her Aunt Mildred are all standing around her, oblivious to the boy's actions and blaming her for the fire. Wake up, Alice. It's your Aunt Mildred.
You said bad things about Ma.
Poor child, she doesn't know what she's saying.
You said those things to upset me because you know that's when it happens and you want it to happen. I won't live here anymore. Not since Ma left. Not since you came. Don't touch me. You made it happen.
It just started by itself. The fire just started by itself. It's so satisfying because all the other fires have started off screen. So you finally get to see how it actually happens. And as she gets more and more upset, the smoke starts to appear and the flames come out. And they really do a great job with the special effect. But it's also satisfying from a character perspective, because her father finally learns that Alice is not doing it on purpose. And he learns how mean her Aunt Mildred is. So you get the impression that Alice's home life is about to improve, which is what you want for her.
Have you ever had the feeling that you knew what someone was going to say just before they said it? Or have you ever walked into a strange room and had the sensation that you've been there before? Well, if you have, you've taken a small step beyond. Now watch a giant step.
Number 2, night of April 14th. Grace is getting married and is going to have a honeymoon in Switzerland. But she has been having nightmares about drowning. Unexpectedly, plans have changed, and her fiancé Eric tells her that their honeymoon will now be on the unsinkable ship, the Titanic. Other characters have similar premonitions, and of course they all come true. I think the Titanic is the most fascinating disaster to ever occur. There's the romance of this amazing ship. It's scary with the iceberg and the sinking. And it's tragic with all the people that died. And I think that's why it continues to be retold and retold. And despite the low budget and half-hour running time, this is a groovy and unique retelling of the Titanic story. They use stock footage from the 1937 film History is Made at Night for the iceberg. They talk about the famous Titanic passengers, the Astors, being on board. And they show famous Titanic situations, like Grace and Eric being separated, with Grace on the lifeboat and Eric on the ship. So they hit all the marks, and the theme of premonitions gives it such a unique spin. Now, I've never had a premonition, but I know someone who has. But like most people, I've had a couple moments of deja vu. So even though I don't understand what it's like to have a premonition, I feel like I could relate to it. And knowing that something terrible is going to happen, but you can't stop it, has to be terrifying. Now, part of what makes One Step Beyond such a unique show in general is that it's based on real evidence. And in this one, John Newland explains what the real evidence is.
You've seen some of the unexplained supernatural events surrounding the life and death of the great ship. Now, do you remember this book? It was published in 1898, 14 years before the ill-fated vessel was even dreamed of. Its title, Futility. Its author, Morgan Robertson. It's the story of the largest liner ever built, carrying on its maiden voyage the rich and great of the world. Then on an April night, it struck an iceberg. The vessel in this book weighed 70,000 tons. The Titanic, 66,000 tons. The length of the ship in these pages, 800 feet. The Titanic, 882 feet. Both made 25 knots. Both carried about 3,000 passengers. Both liners had lifeboats for only a fraction of that number. And both were considered unsinkable. Oh, and one more thing. The author called his ship the Titan.
While the premonitions in the episode were fictional, this evidence suggests that there were real ones. And if this doesn't make you believe in psychic phenomena, what else will?
Number 1. The Haunted U-Boat. It's near the end of World War II. Herr Botman, a high-ranking Nazi official, has gone on board the U-Boat 147. Botman, the captain, and the crew keep hearing the strange pounding. Botman becomes more and more frightened, and the pounding gives away their location.
A Nazi submarine is the perfect setting for a ghost story, because when you're in a submarine at sea, especially during war, you are cut off from the world. You can't run away, you can't get help, you are stuck there with the ghost. And there's this sense of claustrophobia, because you're in a tight space and you don't have access to fresh air. Now, during World War I, Germany did have a haunted U-boat, the SMUB-65. But switching it to the Nazi era gives it a whole nother level of interest, because you're dealing with ordinary people who became monsters. And that is especially true of Herr Botman.
Werner Klemperer, who would later be known as the world's funniest Nazi, Colonel Klink on Hogan's Heroes, was actually from a Jewish family that had fled Nazi Germany, and he does an amazing job at playing the serious and evil Herr Botman. He's a true Nazi, in that he values the Nazi ideals and dreams higher than human life. He said he cried because he saw signs of aging on Hitler. This puts him at conflict with the captain, who looks out for his men, and is a captain first and Nazi second. At first, when they hear the pounding, the captain thinks it's one of his men and wants to save him. But Botman says no, because it would put the Nazi dream at risk. But when all the men are accounted for, and the pounding persists, Botman goes from perplexed, to nervous, to scared, to paranoid.
It's bad enough to be sealed up in this coffin, choking on the smell of oil and man, but to endure this idiotic... No! It's coming from here, yes, but there's nothing wrong. It's tight as a drum. Captain, is it possible that one of the men of your crew is doing this deliberately to make it impossible for me to carry out my mission?
The pounding takes that Nazi chip off his shoulder, because at the end, he is desperate to surface, putting the crew and the Nazi dream at risk. This repetitive pounding is known as rapping, and it's been documented in many paranormal cases. It's simple, it's just a sound effect, so they're able to make it realistic and believable. But it's also incredibly eerie, because you don't know where it's coming from, and there is no way to stop it.
During the first season of One Step Beyond, Rod Serling actually met John Newland to assure him that The Twilight Zone would not be a One Step Beyond ripoff. In 1978, John Newland and Collier Young did a short-lived revival series titled The Next Step Beyond. Now this is a baby picture of me. You can see the TV was off. No one was in the room but my mother, who looks nothing like the old woman on the screen. Oh, and one more thing. Ghosts often appear in reflective surfaces.
I've shared my story. Now in the comments, please share yours, if you've ever taken one step beyond.